Welcome. Welcome to the Ghost of Change. What's that, you ask? Well, it's a long story, but the short answer is it's what you're looking at here, all these old things. I'm surrounded by old things, just simply surrounded. They're everywhere. And all the old things have stories connected to them. All the stories, the histories, the reasons they came to be in the first place. And what do I make out of them? I make puppets. The puppets are kind of the, I don't know, they become the ghosts in a way, or the ghosts are in them. I'm not sure. It's a conundrum. It's the interconnectedness. It's how things connect. Everything's connected. And here in my studio, I make a point of trying to put these things together. The puppets all have personalities. They're each very individual, and the performance is just that they exist, that they're here, with us, with me. I live with them. They live with me. And I don't know, we get along somehow. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we do. It's a puzzle. Anyway, these videos will kind of give you a glimpse into my studio, my world here, where the blur between them and me and the ghosts and the present and the past is all part of what I'm going to show you here. To begin with, let's start with this little guy. I'll introduce you to the first gentleman in our cast of characters, our theatrical troupe. Oh, he's so proud of himself. Oh, he's such a show-off.
Eat up a Garibaldi, a nice strawberry, a bananas, a pineapples.
Tony.
Oh, Garibaldi, what you want, lady?
You got a nice fresh vegetable?
I got a nice radish, a cabbage, a spinach, a carrot. What do you want, lady?
I don't care for something today.
Tony has a pony, what you call a nice horse. With the wagon, he would sell the vegetables, of course.
Now Garibaldi, he's the name of Tony's nice as a pony.
Tony drove him all around in Italy.
And when the lady, she's refused to buy,
Tony, he's a get mad and start to cry. What's the matter, you?
I'm not letting you have food here.
No.
No?
Get him, Garibaldi. What's the matter, ain't the net?
I'm not letting you spaghetti.
No.
No.
Get him, Garibaldi. Up a town, down a town, he's a go all day. Sacramento, he give it his stuff away. What's the matter, Isabel?
How's your garlic cheese smell? You.
Oh, get him, Garibaldi. Tony knew the first name of every lady he'd meet. He would yell at all of them as he'd go down the street.
And when they'd poke a fun at Garibaldi, Tony's said,
Don't holler out at him or else he's drop dead.
and when the vegetables commenced to rot,
Tony cried, this job is good for naught. What's the matter, Josephine?
I'm not letting a string of beans.
No. Get him, Garibaldi. What's the matter, Rosemary?
I'm not letting the green peas.
No. Get him, Garibaldi.
One day I saw a Miriam squeeze a big bunch of bananas.
Tony, look and holler, please, try coconut to squeeze. What's the matter, Marguerite?
I'm not letting your stuff to eat.
Oh, get him, Garibaldi. Oh, the business is slow. La 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 la. Hey, 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 everybody walk away. If you don't like the strawberry, the gooseberry, the blackberry, if you don't like the no-berry, I give you the raspberry. What's the matter, Roosevelt? Might be an apple, she's as well. No, you don't Garibaldi. What's the matter, come and see. Try the lemon, she's a sweet. No, you don't Garibaldi.
And when the pony's ribs stick out from the side,
They cry, hey Tony, give her the horse a night to beat your eye. Then the Tony, he's the cause. I tell her the horse for Chingasol. No, you don't Garibaldi.
And now for the Cabbage Eater's illustrious pedigree. So here he is, our hero, Mr. Punch, in an illustration by George Cruikshank, who you may know from the novels of Charles Dickens. He was a big fan of Mr. Punch. So was Charles Dickens. Punch has been performing for over 350 years. The first mention of him was in 1662 by Samuel Pepys, who went to witness a public execution. Opposite the execution was a puppet theater where Punch beat the executioner. Thus, the origin of his notoriety and fame in Britain. He first arrived there by way of Italian puppeteers. His name is based on Pulcinella from the Italian Commedia dell'arte, which may have come from pulcino, or chicken, referring to his gorgeous nose and squeaky voice. You didn't know he had a squeaky voice, did you? Well, he does. While Pulcinella became Punch in Britain, he also arrived in other parts of Europe as Kasperle in Germany, Pulcinella in France, and Petrushka in Russia. Though he started off as a marionette, by the end of the 18th century, glove puppet versions started showing up in small portable booths along streets and country lanes, and especially at the seaside. Here you can see a Punch man with his booth. And around this time, Punch's wife Judy took on more of a role, along with his dog Toby and other stock characters, always including the hangman and the devil, and of course he beat them both. Originally, Punch and Judy shows weren't just for children. There was even a period of time in the 1700s in Britain when the legitimate theater was banned, but puppets weren't. This did not make the legit theater happy, by the way, but that's another long story. Anyway, puppet theater could go where humans couldn't, and this was where political satire thrived, news of the day. Public figures were mocked and fashion parodied. Puppet theater was sort of the avant-garde of its day. It was the people's theater. Street theater. This photograph shows Professor John Codman in his Punch and Judy booth, surrounded by his dog and all his characters that took part in his traveling show in 1967. John Codman was a third-generation Punch professor. That's what they called themselves, professors. Don't you love that? And they certainly were. And this is Toby the dog, who performed with Bert Codman, another member of the famous Codman Punch dynasty. This photo was taken to mark Toby's last performance with him in 1968. It was very common for Punch professors to use live dogs in their shows. They were very close, and Bert died just 2 days after Toby passed away in 1969. I just had to add that. It's a very dear little detail. And here you see images by George Cruikshank of a play he witnessed himself. You'll see all the main characters and, of course, our hero, the victor. Here you see Punch and Toby. Toby's getting the better of him here. Ah, here he is with Judy. The endless marital travails. Ah, and here's the hangman. Looks like Punch is winning again. And of course, he battles the devil. And he wins. And here's a little something from Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor, a cyclopedia of the condition and earnings of those that will work, those that cannot work, and those that will not work. 1861. It's the words of a punchman speaking of his star. There are operas and romances. A romance is far different to an opera, you know, for one is interesting and the other is dull and void of apprehension. The romance is the interesting one, and of the two I likes it the best. But let everyone speak as they find, that is moral. Jack Sheppard, you know, is a romance, and a fine one, but Punch is a opera, a operor we call it, and the most pleasing and most interesting of all as was ever produced. Punch never was beat, and never will, being the oldest performance for many 100 years, and now handed down to posterity. There's a fine moral in it, too. Don't you just love that? A fine moral in it, too. So what is this little guy made from? When I finish a piece, I retire all the materials, and here are the cabbage eaters. They include old passementerie, old silks, and here, for example, is one of the lovely old beads that I used. These were made in Czechoslovakia. They're very old. They're very tiny, almost like each of them tiny little crystals. They're beautifully cut, such subtle color, almost impossible to find something like this nowadays. Why don't I take these materials out and show them to you? Let's take a look. My work is about old ideas, and I felt the best way to communicate that was with old things. These are all quite old, and they come from places in New York, old salvage emporiums that no longer exist, so all the materials also have stories and histories, and it becomes this wonderful collage, all of these elements that come together. Let me show you some of these. This, for example, this is the old silk taffeta that makes up his costume, the main body of his costume. It came from a shop on the Lower East Side on Orchard Street. The shop no longer exists. Orchard Street was famous for its fabric stores. And when I was first in New York, it was absolute treasure to go there and wander through all the fabric stores. This silk is very old. It's probably 1920s. This is a beautiful old watered silk, metallic silk. It's probably from the 1920s. It came from a place called Tinsel Trading, along with this wonderful material which is called passementerie. The passementerie was made in France, and I adore passementerie. I'm a bit of a passementerie maniac. I just love this stuff. It was used on costumes and wonderful things from 1900, trims, and even upholstery. But isn't this beautiful? So, Tinsel Trading is also gone. What a pity. I used to love that store. And look at these wonderful beads. Now, these beads were originally from the Czech Republic. I wish that I could take a jeweler's lens and show you how fine the cuts are on these. The subtlety of the cuts and the colors are just, you cannot find these in anything contemporary today. Even these rod beads I mean, you notice the different shading on them. This is something that just has been lost in more contemporary manufacturing of materials. These all have a kind of handmade element. And so bringing this handmade element from the materials into my handmade work really gives it life, I believe. This is what inspired the vitrine, the box that he stands in. It's called Tramp art. Tramp art was created in the early part of the 20th century by men who were riding the rails, hobos. They would find wood from cigar boxes and old packing boxes, and they would use this technique that actually came from Germany. It's called chip carving, to cut these little grooves in the wood and then assemble them into these wonderful little objects, picture frames and boxes. And this was, I believe, intended to be a child's chest of drawers. You would have had a mirror here. Anyway, the wonderful thing about, one of the many wonderful things about tramp art is that you can read it. Here, for example, if you open the drawer, this was made out of old cigar boxes, and you can see the information, the labels from the cigar boxes. Here's another label in there. Throughout the whole box are what's left of the labels. Let me show you the back. Isn't this wonderful? This shows the name of the company and that it was shoe dressings, polishes, creams for all kinds of boots and shoes, Boston, Massachusetts, USA. So we know that this came at least partly from that area. I just find it completely fascinating that these wonderful things were made out of leftovers and bits and pieces. Some of the most marvelous things in the early part of the 20th century were hobbled together with whatever people could get their hands on, especially during the Depression. I used this as my inspiration and created my own box. I used this knife and wood that is kind of like this, thin pine. They would have used a penknife, which they carried around for everything. And then I cut out with stencils some of the other bits of wood that were applied to the chip-carved surfaces. But really, I owe my tip of the hat to this marvelous art form, which I don't know, there's nothing like it. It's just so wonderful. And now for the musical portion of our program. Did you eat your vegetables today? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed our video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you want to be notified about future visits with the Ghost of Change.